How's it going, everyone? My name's Nate. I'm the owner of Colorado Custom Leather and Blades and your host to The Edge Show. And by the way, welcome. If you are someone like me, you appreciate high quality steel blades, you use them on the daily, live by them, and also like me, you make them. This is the show for you. So last week, and I do apologize for those that are not watching this 6 months down the road from this release date, I did upload the video. I just did not take it out of private, and that's why I didn't share. And my bad, complete fail on my part. We'll make sure that doesn't happen with this one. So with that said, this week we're actually going to talk about something. So if you are a maker, a hobbyist, someone's interested in this, and or you are somebody acquiring a bladesmith, knife maker to make you something, these are some things you should really consider on what you're wanting from them. Like if you're doing a complete order, it's not something you just see on their website, their Instagram, their Facebook, or pictures on the whatever, and you want something completely custom made, or if you yourself are making something custom for you or even somebody else, these are some things to ask yourself. What kind of finish am I putting on the blade, and does it match the job? Does it match its purpose? Because here's one thing, I love artistry knives. I'm actually getting more into that. I'm trying to with my chef, my kitchen knives and stuff that I do. But I will say this, even in that area, I think sometimes we do too much for its job. Now, if it's going to go in a case, it's never going to see a piece of paper even cutting. Okay, whatever. I know this is kind of dramatic, but just hear me on this because it'll make sense. Let's start with, and this is also the difference between stainless steel finishes and high carbon steel finishes. This will also be the lead up to next week where I will officially talk about why I do not like stainless steel and why I primarily work with high carbon steel. I will do stainless steel, but I will not heat treat it myself. I'm not set up for that. I don't know enough about it. Haven't worked a lot with the materials. I've worked with 440C, 440B, and one other one, AEBL something or another. But anyways, back to what I was saying. So let's start with Bushcraft. Let me just ask you a question. If you are an avid outdoors person, okay, an avid outdoors person, why would you buy a knife or make a knife if you're a maker and take the whole thing up to a vertical hand-sanded 800 grit finish on a high carbon steel blade? Why would you do that? It looks great, but until you swing against that first piece of kindling you're trying to make, or you baton it through and you have a mirror finish on the spine. Why? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So if you're designing a knife, right, that you're going to take into the bush, why not make it look rugged? So here's my 3 rules for Bushcraft knives. Okay, just hear me out. I'm going kind of on a rant. What is the edge geometry? Okay, the whole thing leading up to the actual cutting edge. So what is the bevel geometry? What is the overall blade geometry matching that and then leading to the edge? For me, it's between 40 and 50 degrees. So you divide that in half, either 20 to 25 degrees on the edge. Why? Because that makes more sense for when you're batoning your making kindling, when you're chopping up small stuff, it makes more sense. And I like it to be a little bit, I would like it to be around 1/4 inch, starting with stock. And when I'm talking about that, meaning I'm forging it from that point forward, or 3/8. That's about as small as I go. Why? Because I'm going to destroy this thing. The other thing is why am I going to put, I'm just going to show you an example. I did this knife as a challenge. By the way, I'm going to be doing raffle knives once a month on the Facebook page, and probably do some Instagram stuff where I challenge myself to beat my time. So my newest time in building an entire knife is 7 minutes and 49 seconds, including heat treat and all that stuff. And I started with a very small piece of steel, not very wide, not very long, at 1/4 inch, and this is what we have. Now, look at the spine finish. What grit do you think that is? Go ahead and put it in the comments if you want, and then I'm going to tell you. Guess what grit that is? That is 100 grit. A lot of people say that you do not truly finish a knife until you're at 220. Why? Because as soon as I take this blade, or the person that actually won the raffle with this knife, and they go to baton it into a piece of wood, or they use it to do a striker fire because it's 1095 steel and it's hard on the spine, it's going to get scratches. 100 grit finish, hand sanded vertically, is going to hide that. If I even hand sanded it here, even 200 grit, but really 100, 120 for this type of knife is something I really am starting to enjoy, because if I scratch it, it's going to be hidden. Whereas if I design this and I put a 800 grit hand sand finish all the way up, all the way around it, it's going to get scratched. It's going to be more noticeable. It's going to be harder to fix. You can't really fix it. At the same time, also, where is my the third rule is talking about the edge, the finish, and now the other thing is the biggest with high carbon steel. What's the anti-rust protection? How am I going to protect this from rusting? Even though rust is not that big of a deal unless it's left alone and it's not dealt with. You don't spray some WD-40 on it and try to get that out, or boil your blade and create a patina or put a patina on it. These are all things that, again, when you go into bushcraft design, you should really think about. So again, what is the geometry of the blade in its entirety? The bevels to the edge. Is it, designed for the job? And is the, just a side note, but is the finish going to actually make sense for its job? And what is my anti-rust qualities? What am I using? This is a ferric chloride dip for about 25 minutes, and I think I soaked it. After neutralizing it, I soaked it another 20 minutes or something like that. And then it's 100 grit hand sand finish all the way around. Beautiful knife, and it's functional. And I'm not going to have to worry about, or the customer's not going to have to worry about, or the person that won the raffle is going to have to worry about scratches that much. Now, that being said, would you want to do that to a chef knife? But let me first, actually, before I do that, let me show you two other examples of some stainless steel knives I was designing that are stock removal that I haven't touched in 3 years almost. So this is one of them. Okay, you can see the little serial number. I think I was doing LF, standing for little foothills or light foothills, something light foothills. Stainless steel one. This was 440B or 440C steel. This is the actual stonewashed finish, which this one would have been. That is a stonewashed finish. So here's another thing too, is if you look really closely, right there, that is rust. Imagine that. Stainless steel can actually rust. How it happens is you put it against something that is not stainless steel, another stock removal, and eventually it will latch on to that stainless steel. Or if you have found a stainless steel knife in the woods or fishing or something like that, and it's been laying against a piece of a rock that's constantly wet, or moss or something like that, it will eventually rust or patina. It's going to happen, okay? With that being said, so when you're designing bushcraft knives or everyday carry, you got to think about those things. What is the anti-rust protection? Am I going to be using stainless steel? Am I going to be using high carbon steel? Does it make sense? Does the finish make sense? Now, moving on and closing to the kitchen more knives, the more artistry knives. It makes 100% sense to go to 220 minimum, all the way up to in the thousands, meaning 8,000, I think, is the highest grit sandpaper you can acquire. And also, what are you going to put it in? I mean, and this is something like if you're doing a build for somebody, these are all cost-effective things that you have to look at, because, I mean, the fastest kitchen knife that I've ever made is 3 days. Heat treat, all that stuff, the scabbard build, all this. Whereas more complicated builds with geometry, with designs I've never really done, and also trying to do forge to finish and match what I drew on paper, which I'm going to show you here in a second. Just bear with me. It's time consuming. And when you put in hand sanding, and this is the point what I'm getting with your finish, with a high carbon steel blade, I'm going to be honest with you, it does not make sense to me to go past 220 grit on a hand sanded vertically or hand rubbed, however you want to say it, because when you cut into anything acidic, meat, hot meat at that, you're going to get a cool little rainbow design going through your blade, which is perfectly normal. That is what it is designed to do. There are things you can do to prevent that. Doing a mustard patina, letting it soak in coffee for a while, which will darken it, or do a ferric chloride dip, and all these other things. But if you are just wanting that nice flashy steel color, 220 grits where I would really stop, because it'll hide that patina. It won't be as transparent, and it will still look decent. It'll be hidden behind all those grinds, if that makes sense. So let me just show you some examples here. This is actually one I just completed for a customer. This is also a hormone that I put on this. That's a ferric chloride finish. I took this up to 3,000 grit. Let me show you what 3,000 grit takes, especially because sometimes when you're working with Hammonds, which we'll do a video at another time, you have to go back down to 220 because you etched too long. So then you have to go all the way back up. Let me just show you my pile here. That's what it takes to get up to 1,000. Given that's 2 knives, but that is no exaggeration. You will have a pile of sandpaper. You cannot skip steps. Don't skip more than, when you're in the lower hand sanding portion, do not skip more than 200 grits. Meaning if you started at 120, move to 220. Don't go from 220 to 800. Don't go to 600, go to 400, and then forth. Now, when you get up into the thousands, you're going to run through sandpaper really fast because it's finer grit. It's going to go away, and use wet to dry. But my point is this, okay? You're going to have to put in time when you're doing a finish such as this. This is the other knife. You can't really see because I just hand put in the edges there. This is hand sanded up to 2,000 to pull out that hamon, because that's another thing too, is how you finish. Do you have a Hammond line? Do you have a water Hammond because you're working with 1095 and you quench it in unevenly in oil or water or whatever? You're most likely going to have those things. So those are aesthetic pleasing to the eye stuff that you're going to have to pull out, and that's also what the customer wants, what you want. But in honesty, if you're going to do something like this, and let me just show you, I had to build a scabbard to meet its job and purpose. So I had to design this whole thing, matching the scales, matching everything. So yes, it made sense. I would have to go up into the thousands with high carbon steel blades because I had a Hammond that I was trying to pull out. I also needed to build a scabbard, but this is about the finish. So this is just, let me set the phone down for a second. Finish is everything. The most important thing about a knife is the heat treat, okay? You can learn the finishing stuff afterwards. After you get the heat treat, then you want to worry about the finish. The finish includes the scabbard. The finish includes, does your scales match or have contrast to the artistry part of knife making? Does it blend well together? Does doing a ferric chloride finish on a knife such as a kitchen knife make sense? Well, yeah, it does with a Hammond, but why, if it's high carbon steel, why go past 220? They're beautiful finishes. Because again, if you're in the 600s and as soon as you cut into meat, it's going to go purple, blue, yellow. I mean, it's crazy. It almost looks like a rainbow Hammond. I mean, it's crazy. But in closing, because I don't want to go into 14 minutes here, think about when you design your knife, what its functionality is going to be for. Ask your customer that. If you're buying a custom-made knife from somebody, they're making it for you, ask yourself the question, what am I going to be using this for? Okay, guys, because that will translate to your finish. Anyways, God bless. Keep your edges sharp. We'll see you next week.